Hey guys, this is Phil Galfond for RunItOnce.com. I hope some of you missed falling asleep to my voice. It's been about a year since I made a training video, and honestly, I've missed it a lot. For those of you who haven't seen any videos of mine or don't know a ton about me, I really do enjoy talking about poker, teaching poker, and it's probably because I really enjoy thinking about poker. I find it really interesting. So this will be the first video that I release on Run It Once, and so I want to start by welcoming you to the site. I won't get too into the features of the website and everything like that. It's a project that I've been working very hard on, and I'm really proud of what we've been able to put together, and I hope you guys check it out and enjoy it. And I'm also happy to answer any questions relating to that in the comments section here or anywhere else that you can find me. I thought we would kick it off in style with some high stakes, loose aggressive games. Here I have 4 tables of 200, 400 deep ante PLO. On all 3 of the tables I have Sauce and Isildur, 2 of the toughest and most loose aggressive opponents that I face, and certainly 2 of the opponents that require kind of the heaviest strategy adjustments from the regular opponents. Then I also have Illyri, also known as Zygmunt, on 2 tables, and Broski here. This is Gus Hansen. So everybody in the game is pretty loose aggressive all around. Certainly they have different tendencies, but maybe we can get into that a little bit as the video goes on. I think it's important, when you're at a loose aggressive table, you generally want to play a style that's opposite the table, which means you want to play kind of a tighter style in this spot and let them put some money in with weak hands, especially like, having Isildur open light and having Sauce 3-bet him light, and then I can wake up with a big hand. Obviously, like that doesn't require any doing from me, but that's a situation that you get to find yourselves in a lot. And what you can do is avoid opening weak hands in early position, getting 3-bet and cold 4-bet by some very loose aggressive players, and you really need to play hands that can flop well and that can stand some heat. That said, given that my opponents are all smart and all loose aggressive, I think it creates kind of an interesting game dynamic in that they know that I'm the tightest at the table, effectively. And I think because they're all so loose aggressive, it's going to kind of accentuate the tight style that I play. So it's going to stand out more to them. So I think that they'll kind of be focused more on playing against the other opponents, because they think those opponents might be like forcing more money in, putting in more action, and putting them in tougher spots. So while I do want to play tight, I want to capitalize on the fact that I think they're going to expect me to be more in line, given the way the game's set up, than I actually am, and I want to even go the opposite route and be less in line. So sorry for the long intro. For those of you who haven't watched my videos before, I tend to do that. Here on the top right table, I defend Ace King 9-6, Ace High Suit, very standard. All of us are opening pretty wide on the button, and this is kind of miles ahead of his opening range. Not strong enough to 3-bet though, certainly. So I have my first interesting spot on the turn. I think a lot of people's standard would be to bet here, and I think it's a fine play. It really depends on your opponent and their image of you. The problem I have with leading, I shouldn't even say it's a problem, but I actually prefer a check. And the reason is, first of all, there are not a lot of rivers that are good for my hand. So if I bet turn and the river is any card, effectively, I'm not going to be able to comfortably value bet. I mean, on like total bricks I am. Obviously, if I make full house I am. But on any kind of 9-10, queen, ace, even this 7-5, I'll be a little uncomfortable. I'll value bet on a good bit of them, but it's kind of in a spot where I'm going to bet turn with good equity, get called, and then have to potentially face up my hand a little bit on the river when I check, when the board gets a little scary, and then I'm in a check and guess kind of game, and he's going to bluff at a good frequency, value bet thinly. What I prefer to do here is check call, and it accomplishes a few things. First of all, it's great for my range. A lot of people check twice here and don't really have a continuing range. Some occasionally check raise, but um, a lot of people don't put a lot of their hands in their check calling range. They just lead out with them. This specific hand, I think it's just awesome because he will bet a lot of hands in this spot, and a lot of them doing extremely well against. So, while I bet the turn, while when I bet the turn I get called by worse hands, certainly, they're hands with decent equity. When I check here and he bets with, you know, ace 10, 8 4, I'm getting, you know, 2200 in or whatever he decides to bet. Very, very good. And I think it's so in addition to being a good range play, it's just a nice vacuum play as well. And I have a tiny bit of deception as far as the river when the 6 or the king pairs, um, or even on a total brick. I think he's going to value bet too thinly and bluff a little bit too frequently. Um, so not a great river for me. He checks back, and he had top pair, turned an open ender. So I think it probably would have played out the same whether I led or checked. Here in the bottom right table, Sauce limps the button. This is something he's been doing recently. Isildur completes, and I check in the big blind. I actually think my hand, as far as pre-flop, is doing pretty well against their ranges. I think, first of all, Sauce, he's just started this limping strategy, but I have to assume it's generally a weakish range, but just there's so much money in the pot and he has position that he thinks he can profitably play it for limp. But Isildur is somebody that I think is going to pot out of the small blind with a lot of his stronger hands, so I don't see either of them having a super strong range. That said, King Jack 10-3 is just a little bit too weak for me to raise in this spot, especially against, like I said, two tough, loose, aggressive players. Flop top 2, backdoor flush draw, and I'm debating between checking and leading. I decided to lead. First of all, I think Sauce is going to check back with a pretty good frequency here. I'm not expecting him to stab with many worse hands, and actually there are a lot of hands that will call. For instance, 10-7, XX, Jack 8, 5-4, potentially. Maybe that's a little too weak. But anyways, there's some hands he'll call with that'll check back, and I'd just like to get a little bit of value now and also protection for my hand. And if I do face a raise from either of these players, I don't think I'm going to be able to fold the flop right away. I'm going to call and see if I can turn some kind of extra outs, or obviously a full house would be nice, and then make my decisions from there. But I also like to have this hand in my range, since with the exception of Jack-Jack, I don't expect them to expect me to lead many hands that can turn a boat. So when the 10 does pair, especially if the Jack pairs, I think they're going to expect me to have 8-9 or some kind of weakish semi-bluff very often. So I expect to get either called down or bluffed when I do hit my hand or improve my hand. I guess I already have hit kind of a hand. But they both fold, which is also a fine result. It's I do have top 2 pair, but it's not a hand with a ton of equity against any any one pair plus overs has a reasonable amount of equity, so I'm happy to take it down. King Queen 9-6 double suited, just strong enough to 3-bet in my opinion against a loose button opening range. Even against a tighter range, if the player was weaker, I would 3-bet. But yeah, I don't need to talk about that. Flop is Ace-5 Deuce. I actually think this is a flop that against certain opponents I'm going to check a good majority of my range. The cons of betting here are, with the exception of Ace-Ace and some kind of double pair that involves 5-5 or Deuce-Deuce, somehow maybe like an Ace-King-Jack 5. You rarely have 2-pair or better on this board. And yes, I do 3-bet most of my ace-aces and all my double pairs that include 5-5 or Deuce-Deuce. Not a ton of Ace-5 combos, but it's still not a big chunk of my range. So this is a board where bluff raise in his spot works reasonably well against a straightforward player in my shoes who's c-betting too much. But on the other side of things, I don't c-bet this board at an extremely high frequency. And it's also a board that, while it's not great for my range, it's not great for his either. Neither of us, I'm especially not going to have many 3-4 combos. I forgot to mention that. But the thing is, yes, I don't have two pair all that often or better, but for him to credibly raise, like his value raising range here is going to be 3-4, ace ace, ace 6-5-4. Like he might not raise all of his ace 5 combos, certainly not his ace deuce combos. I wouldn't expect him to at least. So because of that, he can't have a very high raise frequency here, and for value, which means if he's going to be smart and balanced, he's not going to have a really high bluff raise frequency here. And it's also not a very floatable board if he has, Jack Jack 10-5. Uh, it's not a hand that has a ton of improvability. So I think just, half pot c bet here is going to show a profit, and you just have to be careful going overboard with it, I would say. Top left table, I have certainly a playable hand. I think it's important that you guys know this is the fourth headset that I bought. I hope the sound quality is coming out okay. I'm actually leaving town in one day, and while Vancouver has a lot of great things, apparently headset selection is not one of them. I'll talk real quick about the top right as I flop top two pair. Three betting this hand out of the big blind is certainly reasonable. Oh, that's the other thing. Even in my previous recording, I kept saying certainly, and I'm gonna try to stop, but I'm not gonna be able to stop. So just keep that in mind and and let it bother you more now that you realize it. Um, it's a hand that is ahead of his range equity wise, and it does have better playability than most of his range. However, I try to not get carried away three betting all my high card hands because those are boards that I already hit often enough. I like to have decent board coverage so that when the board comes high cards, I don't always have it. When the board comes low cards, I don't have it. Obviously, always is an overstatement, but you know what I mean. So I take some of my non-monster high card hands like this and opt not to three bet with them. I think three betting here is a reasonable strategy. But what I like about keeping my three betting range a little bit more deceptive, I also keep my calling range a little bit more deceptive here. He is not going to put me on many combos of ace ace king king or ace king. Meanwhile, I defend 7-5-4-3 on the bottom right, pretty standard against button open, even though Sauce is going to have a slightly tighter range given that he's limping some hands. I think it's very important to, I've said this before somewhere, but when somebody has a strategy, whether it's, check raising a lot of turns or in this case limping a lot of buttons, it's important to think about how to adjust to that strategy, but it's also important to think about how that strategy affects their other ranges. And if somebody is check raising a lot of flops, for instance, their check calling range is going to be generally weaker depending on how they opt to check raise. But let's say somebody check raises, all their very good hands and a lot of their good hands, like marginal to good hands. It's tough to fight back against that range, and a lot of people think, how do I take advantage of that when he's just, always ends up having a hand to continue with, even though his check raise stat's kind of high. And the answer is you don't really fight back against his check raises. What you do is fight back when he calls, and you can end up, taking advantage of a weaker range. So in this case, I think I have to keep in mind that his range is a little bit stronger than it otherwise would be when he'd be opening, quite a bit on the button, if not for his new limping strategy. I check call flop on the top right. Sorry, I got a lot of hands going on here. Top left, I think, is just going to be a quick hand. I'm going to raise and c-bet and take it down, and, a small c-bet's all you need here. Bottom left, I'm going to fold. On the top right, check raising is an okay option. You really need a what's the word for it? Like a history, a game dynamic that allows you to check raise light on this board. And I don't get carried away check raising the Ace King X rainbow boards, although it's actually a pretty good board to check raise, and maybe I should. The reason it's a good board to check raise is because a lot of his hands, that have top pair even are going to be, Ace Jack 10 deuce. And even a hand like that doesn't have a ton of equity against the hands that I'm repping, which are essentially sets and ace king. And then obviously if he has, mid pair or even bottom two pair, I hope you guys couldn't hear that. I had some computer update and it was very loud in my headphones. And I tried to talk through it. Anyways, yeah, like on a 9 high board, there are a lot of hands that can continue because they have, mid pair and 2 overs, or bottom pair and 3 overs, or, a gut shot and 3 overs, things like that. But on Ace King X, nobody's going to have overs, and they're not even going to have overs to like top pair with overs to second pair. So this is a good board to check raise in general for fold equity, and because of that, maybe I should be raising a hand like this, but I haven't gotten too carried away with check raising these boards because they're not amazing for my big blind calling range. And so because of that, I feel like I'd rather play this deceptively and check call and check call down pretty much. Whew. On bottom right table, sorry guys, for those of you who don't know, I tend to ramble. But there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. On the bottom right table, I turned 2 pair with my open ender. First of all, on the flop, I was going to check call. You can actually consider check raising a hand like this against certain opponents. For instance, like Isildur is actually an opponent. I can consider check raising a hand like this because he's somebody that on a dry rainbow board like this is going to have a reasonably wide bluff 3-betting range, and so I could actually check raise this to 4-bet get in. Most opponents though don't attack that aggressively enough, and obviously it's to check raise 4-bet get in as a semi bluff, but it's just a nice that you have some outs so you can do it with that, and a blocker to second set or top 2 pair. Anyways, most opponents I don't like to do that against, and I was going to check call here, and now on the turn I'm in a kind of similar situation to the hand earlier at the beginning of the video with King 6 against Isildur. I have 2 pair. I'm not expecting to be able to bet many turns and bet many rivers. However, Sauce is somebody who likes to raise a lot of turns, which is an extremely effective strategy, and actually, checks back a reasonable balanced range so that he's able to raise some turns. A lot of people just bet, like bottom 20% or maybe like bottom 40% and top 30% of their hands, and they just don't have hands that can value raise turn unless the board changes drastically. Sauce is not like that. He has pretty well balanced range. So I like to have a hand like this in my turn betting range because, first of all, it is getting some value, it's getting a little bit of protection, but also it's a hand that can stand a raise. I'm not going to 3-bet against a raise. I'm just going to call, and, on the river I make some decisions. Okay, so top right. All right, 2 hands going on at once. Let's talk about the Sauce hand first, since we were just talking about it. Bottom right. Jack is a pretty awful river for me. Gives him a lot of 2-pair hands. Given that his preflop raising range is a little bit tighter now that he has a limping range, he's going to have some more connectivity. So if he does have a 7 or a 10, he's often going to have a Jack to go along with it. I don't see any value in betting a hand this week. I mean, I could see an argument for it, but I think it's just a little too weak. So I have to check, and if I face a bet, I have to. I think I do face a bet here. Just trying to. I'll talk about the Sauce hand. And we'll go back to the top right hand later. If I do face a bet here on the bottom right, which I do, spoiler alert, I have to kind of break down his range. And what's difficult about finding a call here is that there's no flush draw either on the flop or the turn. So a lot of his drawing hands will either be, include like pair plus low straight draw with the 3 deuce, like 5-4, or pair plus high straight draw with 7-8, 7-8-9, something like that. And he's probably value betting here as thinly as maybe 10-7 even. I don't think he has 10-7 because I think he often will raise that on the turn. But anyways, he's going to value bet Jack Deuce in my opinion. He's very tough and thin value better, and bluffs at a good frequency to balance that out. And so because of that, I think there are just too many combos of hands that he can value bet in this spot, and not enough hands that he can bluff with. He'd have to be turning, Ace King. I guess like Ace 8-7-6 into a bluff, which he probably would if he got here with it, but there just aren't enough combos of it. Also, the fact that I have 5-4 in my hand makes it a little bit less likely he's going to have the kind of low straight possibilities. So I think I'm comfortable folding here, which is what I believe I end up doing. And don't worry, we're going to get back to the other hand in a second. actually, okay, I end up folding here. Let's go back to the to the Isildur hand. Uh, so if you remember the action, I check called flop after calling pre-flop. I check turn and he checked behind. I river the nut flush on a paired board. Given that it's especially the queen of clubs, it's a great card for me because I have the queen in my hand, and what that means is it's extremely unlikely that he has a boat. So effectively, you know, even though this isn't first or second or third nuts, it's the nuts in this spot, and so I have to decide if I want to bet. And probably bet call. I don't think I can bet 3-bet, even though I feel it's a nuts. Just by the time he raises, he should be pretty polarized. He's not going to raise a jack-high flush and call it off. Or check raise. And it certainly, you know, is a hand that I can check raise for value. Not too thin by any means. I think that, you know, I have to break down his range. He doesn't have a 6 in check back turn very often. I mean, every player at this level is going to have a little bit of deception in their games, so I can't count it out entirely. But almost no 6s check back, pretty much no boats. So as far as hands I'm getting called by, it would have to be kind of a backdoor jack 10 or some kind of, you know, ace queen or ace XXX that just doesn't believe me. The problem with the queen hitting is that there aren't really any hands that I float the flop with that don't hit something at this point. It would have to be, I guess, even, you know, like king, queen, 10, 7. I don't really have to bluff at this point. I guess I could even check raise bluff with that hand with the blockers, but yeah, I think it's just better to check here. First of all, I don't think he has a ton of showdown value, so I don't expect to get called by much, and you know, I just have to check and hope he bluffs or hope he has a flush, and he's going to bet it himself. And then when I do check raise, he actually can talk himself into a call, because I actually can have bluffs in that situation. If I check the river with king queen, if I check the river with, you know, ace jack XX, I can opt to check raise that, or even ace king. I can opt to check raise. So it's a weird spot where my river leading range shouldn't contain a lot of bluffs, my check raising range still can. So that's the play that I prefer. And, you know, oftentimes he's going to check behind, but also oftentimes, probably more often, I'm going to bet and he's going to fold. So it's just a spot where I'm not expecting to make a ton of money, but I still want to max my EV however I can. And at the time I was debating, and yeah, ended up checking, and he insta-checked, so I felt silly, but I don't think he had a hand he could have called with anyways. So on the top left table, pretty standard open from the cutoff with king jack 7-6 with a suit. On the top right table, this is actually a hand king 10 7-5 with a suit that is not as bad as it may look. In a either deeper game or a game with where either sauce was weaker or the blinds were not so loose aggressive, I would consider calling here and use my position, but sauce is a tough player, and even though he's opening a wide range, I'm not expecting to be able to outplay him enough to play the in position to play this hand. He's just too good. And also, both Isildur and Illyri are very aggressive 3-betters, so I'm very often going to have to face a 3-bet and probably have to fold and, you know, have wasted some money. Flop very nicely on the top left with mid-pair gut shot and second nut flush draw. Against pretty much any bet from him, I don't think there's an option. I just have to shove. I guess I don't have to, but I think it just plays the best. It's a hand with a lot of equity, but not a hand with a lot in the way of implied odds. If, let's say he bet 4K here, if I were to call and the turn were a diamond, I wouldn't expect to make a ton of money. If I were to call and the turn were a 5, I wouldn't expect to make a ton of money or get a ton of money in unless his hand was better than mine or had a ton of equity. And if I call and the turn is an offsuit queen, I expect him to, you know, jam anything that he was going to get in on the flop with, definitely, and maybe some more hands as well that, you know, picked up queen X, things like that. And then I, you know, I have to get it in. I get to get it in, depending on how you want to look at it, but my equity is not as good. So I'd rather just force it in now. Well, my equity is good against pretty much everything, and I don't really have a ton of playability on future streets. Works out nicely for me. That should have been pretty much Maybe even slightly better for me, I'm not sure. I haven't, as I said, I haven't made videos in quite a while, and I have played a lot of poker in the last year. So while I haven't gone back and watched anything that I've made in the past, I would assume that my game has progressed a lot. So I'm curious if you guys think that this is much different um, than what I've taught you in the past. Enough about the past. I open the button on the top left, Queen 10, 9 deuce, 10 high suit. I think this is a standard open. Not a whole lot to say about it. And Illy's taking his sweet time, as he's apt to do. Illyr does this funny thing where it's like, he's not doing it here, but it's like a semi-slow roll where you shove flop and he has like a 40%, 50% equity draw. And he just takes his time. Takes such like it's an auto call, and he just takes his sweet time to call. It's not like it's not really a slow roll in that he doesn't have the best hand, um, but it's pretty funny. I think he might be taking some time to root for cards actually. All right, so we got a couple spots here. On the top left table, he three bets and checks. Illyr, actually both Illyr and Sauce have a pretty well developed flop range in three bet pots. They're different than each other's, but they play these spots better than most in that they check a balanced range, bet a balanced range, and pay attention to what the board is and what they can rep and what their opponents might have. This may look like a hand that wants to check back and realize some equity. And that actually, when I looked at it, is my first instinct. But the more I think about it, it's just a good hand to bet with. Because, first of all, when I do check this back, it's not that often that I turn a great hand that's like very playable. If I turn a jack, that's kind of best case scenario. If I turn a flush, I'm not going to make that much money. But even on a queen, I'm not that happy. On an ace, I'm not that happy. And can't really even, on like an ace, I can't really stand a bet on a low like 5, 7, 5. I mean 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Can't really stand a bet unless I want to make some kind of move and float. So while it looks like a hand with, that would like to see some more cards, I think you have to think about how the hand's going to play out when you do check back. And Illyr's going to bet a lot of turns, and I'm going to have to fold a lot of turns. Yes, he potentially could be check jamming this flop. However, what's nice about that for me is that a big chunk, I would say maybe even half of his check jamming range, maybe more, is going to contain clubs that dominate mine. So I'm actually not folding away very much equity at all when he check jams. And if he check calls, which he's capable of doing, I have some equity. I have a lot of turns that I can jam. And I think I just take it down here enough. And so, why not stab with a hand with a little bit of equity? On the bottom right table, I open and call a 3-bet in a three-way spot. It's a really pretty looking hand, isn't it? But it's not that amazing in a three-way 3-bet pot because you're just going to flop weak flush draws with, bottom pair or no pair other than the fives, and you're just not going to get it in good very often. You're not going to be that happy about your situation. But it's good enough for me to continue. I check back on the top left, and you guys can't see it, but I'm shaking my finger at old Phil, past Phil. So on this ace, I actually do expect Illyr to bet a lot. I could consider floating if he does. I don't remember if he does or not. Yeah, he does, but I'm probably just going to have to fold. On the bottom right table, this is an interesting spot. 9-8 deuce, backdoor flush draw for me, and as well as little backdoor straight draw and mid pair. When we have what do we have, like 2.5x pot left, I don't expect Illyr to be checking any strong hands here. maybe a super monster, but for the most part, I would expect him, even if he just has queens or kings, just a pot, and hope to take down the pot, but have some equity if he gets it in against one of us. So I actually don't think that Illyri has a lot of hands he can continue with in this spot. Sauce, however, is going to check a lot of his strong range to Illyri, so that Illyri pots kings, I get faced with a bet, and then I go with Jack 10, 6 deuce, and then wakes up with Queen Jack 10 with spades, or just a hand that top two set, something like that, something that dominates mine. So while I do think Illyri has told us a lot about his range, I don't think Sauce has told us much of anything about his range, other than that he doesn't have a marginal hand that he might want to just pot out with and try to take down the pot. And he's like a hand that he's not folding, but wants to get a little bit of fold equity with it. Although I think actually he's not as predictable as that. Anyways, my options here are to check or bet. And I can definitely worry about sizing as well, is kind of what I meant. I unfortunately haven't you don't find yourself in a situation like this often, and I haven't really developed a small bet size range here. I'm usually with this much money in the pot, just going to pot a lot of the hands that I bet. I think it would be nice for a case like this specifically, where Illyri's kind of face up to his weak hand, in my opinion, to just bet like 5-6K, and Sauce is going to fold his weak stuff, and Illyri's going to fold his weak stuff, which is very frequent, and I just give myself a really good price to steal the pot. And obviously, I'd balance that with some strong hands. I haven't put that into my game yet. I just haven't had the situations arise often enough. I opted to check here, and I think that's my standard. I do have some ways to improve on the turn, and I get to learn a little bit more about Sauce's range at that point too. And so on the top left, I'm mad at myself for not betting, and I'm sad that I have to fold a gut shot and a flush draw, but it's just too easy for me to be dominated by ace-x of clubs, or, I mean, even king, queen, jack with queen high or jack high clubs. I just don't have enough equity to continue, except as a total float, and he's just going to jam rivers into me too frequently for me to make money on my float. On the top right table, it's a limp pot. Sauce bets 8-5-4, and I have the blockers. I actually Sauce more than most. I don't expect him to be betting a super weak range in this spot. However, I just kind of feel somewhat obligated to have some semi-bluffs, and I mean bluffs in my range. For the most part, I'm going to have a value check raise range of nuts, nuts with free roll, and then top set with a gutter, middle set with a gutter, things like that. I need some bluffs in my range, and this is the perfect hand for it. With the 7-7 blockers, makes it just less likely that he has a straight himself, and hopefully I get a fold now or on the turn or potentially by the river. On the bottom right table, I turn an 8 high flush draw with my mid pair, and Illyri bets 8K. I think what he's thinking in this spot is I check behind flop, I being Mr. Sweets 28, and so unless I picked up a deuce, I don't have a very strong range. I don't have a range that can go with this very often. Sauce checked twice, and although I think actually Sauce is capable of having a hand here, he often shouldn't have it's not a big chunk of his range that's continuing. So I think Illyri's going for a cheap bluff here, 8K into just under 15K, and my hand is not very exciting, especially if I jam here and get called by either one of them. I'm often going to be drawing dead or near dead. But that said, I just think there's 22 in the pot. I'm risking 37 to win 22, and will give me a tiny bit of equity so that it has to work actually half the time rather than like 65%. But I think Illyri's folding like 70%, 80% of the time here, given my flop read, if I'm confident in it. And so I just have to fade, Sauce waking up with a big hand in this spot, and I think that you have to be willing occasionally to semi-bluff with a hand that doesn't actually have that many outs when called, because otherwise I think you're not attacking boards as hard as you need to. Top left, I 3-bet a double-suited, somewhat connected hand. It's a little bit less exciting given that his opening range should be a little bit tighter than it used to be, but it's still strong enough strong enough to 3-bet in my opinion. And on 7-6-3, two spades, I do have hands in my range that connect with this, so it's not a matter of I can't rep hands that connect with this, but it's very important, in higher stakes, tough games that you manage your own range. And what I mean by that is I'm not going to have 4-5 or 7-7 or 6-7-8-9 with spades as often as I have ace-ace, king-king, ace-king-jack-10, ace-king 10-9, etc. So because of that, I can't just continue and c-bet with all of my weak hands. This is just gonna make me too exploitable. So you have to find hands to give up with, and I think this is a great candidate of a hand a hand to give up with. It's just you don't have to win every pot, and I think it's important against a tough player to strengthen your ranges in spots where they're too weak, and I do that by not continuation betting, all my garbage on a board like this. It's not so good for my range. And I do expect him to stab a lot here, and I expect to lose the pot, but I'm okay with that. Hillary folded on the bottom right, which is pleasant. Not really a surprise, but still pleasant. Sorry, 1 second. I got a waitlist popping up. There's some good 1-2 games going. I might hop in after this video. The top right. So I want to talk about my decision on the turn. Like I said, I don't think he's betting a ton of weak stuff. Like, I don't think Sauce is going to bet 6-5-4 here, where a lot of players would. Certainly not, ace-king 5-4, in my opinion at least. So yes, he will bet some hands that are going to fold to a check raise that are kind of relatively total garbage, but I don't expect him to have a lot of hands that can't continue. And so this bet, when you look at things in terms of his range, is not very attractive to me. I just think it's too often that he has a set or top two with a gutter, or a straight himself. It's to expect a lot of fold equity on this turn. However, I need to have bluffs in my range. It's just mandatory. For the same reason that on the top left table I need to give up some hands, I need to follow through with some weak hands. And this is basically, one of the only bluffs I have in my range. And the 7-7 blockers help. And so I kind of feel obligated here to bet turn and to jam river. And I'm, like I said, not ecstatic about the spot. It may even probably is negative EV in a vacuum, which, is as silly as it sounds in a 200-400 game, especially to make a play that you expect to be a losing play. I play against Sauce so often that I need to make sure that I'm as balanced as I possibly can be. And this is a spot where I'm going to want to get paid off. And it's a spot where he knows that I don't have a very wide bluffing range, I would assume. So maybe that gets me a little bit of fold equity. And if not, it keeps me balanced and sets me up for the future. I'm making it sound, it's not as if I'm just giving away 40K here. Or I guess it'll be just under that. But it's not as if I'm giving away 30K here, expecting, to always lose it. But I do think this turn river bet might be minus EV, or probably is minus EV in a vacuum. But I'm very dedicated to being careful about my my ranges. Top left, or here on the top right, we hit a very fortunate river card, especially with the 2 sevens. It's very likely we're good here. We have just over pot remaining, but this is not a board that I like to pot or bet close to pot on. If he has a set, all I need to do to bluff is to bet around 11K, and that's not to say he'll always fold with a set. He might call sometimes, but the problem with potting as a bluff in these spots is that it's just too frequent that you run into the one card straight, which has a folding percentage of 0 or just over 0 if you include misclicks and disconnects. And so when there's a 4 straight on the board, my bet sizes are closer to half pot, or even sometimes, as little as 30% pot with both my value and my bluffs. A lot of people will get carried away here and say, well, I'm polarized, so I should bet big. But it's just in a spot where, you're taking the concept too far. When you're polarized, you should bet big against a range of bluff catchers. However, Sauce does not have necessarily a range of bluff catchers. He very often has the straight here himself. So because of that, I don't want to bet big and run into strong hands with my bluffs. And really, I just, don't because it's such a risky bluff and a kind of a silly bluff, I don't get paid off with my big hands. Um, there's actually a hand that just happened on the bottom left that was a little bit interesting, or it was a quick hand, but I want to talk about it. So I bet 12K, just over, or just under 12K, and I'm gonna, well, sorry. I'm trying to decide if I want to let you, see the results, or there's a big hand on the top left as well. I'm gonna back it up now and just talk real quickly about this flop play. I raise button, Sauce calls, and I flop top pair with 3 overs to second pair, and I opt to c-bet, and this probably doesn't seem like a super interesting thing to talk about, but this is a hand that I oftentimes will check back. Top pair with 3 overs. It's a hand that can raise a lot of turns when I do hit my overs. It has a little bit of deceptions. It has, a good amount of showdown value as well. And it's a hand that doesn't love to get check raised. It's going to have to call a check raise, but on a lot of turns, it's not going to be doing very well. The reason that I don't check this specific spot back, there are 2 reasons really. One, we're very deep, so I'm going to widen my c-bet range because he should have to tighten his check raise range to just account for the fact that he's not going to be able to raise Jack 4 here and get 170k in. And so even 4-4, he's not going to want to get stacks in here. He still may check raise it and call a 3-bet and evaluate from there. But basically, his value check raising range has to be more narrow. Because of that, his bluff check raising range has to be more narrow, so I can c-bet more in this spot. But the most important thing that I wanted to mention is that I have the ace of diamonds. And while that, at the moment, is not a very relevant card, I mean, it does remove the nut flush draws from his range, which actually further minimizes the range he can check raise with. A lot of his check raising range should involve a nut flush draw here. But what's important is, let's say I bet and call a check raise. Let's say I bet and he calls, and then check raise his turn on an offsuit king, and I call, and then the river's a diamond. Basically, I want to think about the future, and while we're not in the situation yet, I want to be able to rep the nut flush with my blocker when I find myself in the opportunity to bluff, and when I believe it's a good spot. So because of that, I have to think about repping it now. And if I check back, I'm probably going to check back the nut flush draw here with less than 5% of the time, and that's only for deception. So because of that, I need to bet with my nut flush draw blocker, even if I didn't have basically any hand with a nut flush draw blocker, and I'm going to bet here and set myself up to use it later. Here in the top left, he saw 3 bets and checks twice now, and I think on both streets my decisions are close. I think on the flop I just have to check. It's a little bit too, like, the queen and 8 are high connected cards, and just does too well with his 3-bet range, so I don't expect a lot of immediate fold equity on the flop. Can consider setting myself up for barreling opportunities, but I'd rather just check back, and it's a hand that can turn a little bit of equity like this, or can turn a 6 or an 8 or a 4, or can just get away cheap against a hand that wasn't going to fold, which is kind of often the case, I think. When I do pick up the heart, again, I can bet here. I think it's very close, and actually I'm kind of indifferent. I ended up checking. I'm kind of indifferent to the decision there. Yeah, it's okay. You want to have some semi-bluff hands in your range there, and that's a reasonable one to have, but it's just not a board I expect a ton of fold equity on, and it's also a board that I could be drawing very slim on against even some of his check calling hands. On the river, I have to decide if I want to bluff when the backdoor flush gets there. I remember that I think I did bluff here, and yeah, I don't like it. It is reasonable for me to check back a flush draw on the flop and turn, but a lot of my flush draws will be betting at some point. I think you would actually expect me to bet almost all of them by the turn, although as you can see I didn't bet a flush draw on the turn. But because of that, I just don't think I rep this super well, and I kind of leave myself open to getting check raised, bluffed, as well as check called by a lot of decent hands. And that is what happened. He, like I said, he has well balanced ranges here. I don't know actually if he was going to check call or check raise the turn with this hand. I assume check call, even though it is a very strong draw when it's not dominated. With the gutter and two flush draws, he's actually a favorite if he's not dominated. Um, but this is a case of a hand where a lot of people would bet flop, a lot of people would bet turn, um, and potentially get blown off their equity, or bloat a pot out of position and then see a bad turn card and not know what to do. And I really like Sauce's style of choosing when to deceptively play a hand deceptively and keep a pot small at the same time. Bottom right table is just kind of standard give up. I'm not going to talk about it much because I am pausing too frequently here. And I raise Queen Jack Jack 6 double when Sauce limps, and pretty standard. Um, Here on the top right, I defend with the Jack Jack 8-4 with clubs. Flop goes check check, and I bet this turn. I actually, for the reasons I was talking about earlier, prefer a check call. However, it's very close. This is a hand that does have a lot of vulnerability, just in terms of the hands that he's completely giving up with, potentially folding, will contain a lot of ace king combos, and those have outs against my hand. Not to mention bigger flush draws, or he can even just be giving up with a small pocket pair and have a couple outs, and I just let him get there. So I don't mind betting. Here's a protection bet. I just don't think there's a ton of value in it, and there might be a little more value in inducing a semi-bluff or just a weak kind of air delayed c-bet and check calling. Saucer raises on King 3 Deuce. It is a board that I am a little worried he's going to be raising frequently. I do feel comfortable, though, betting this. I think I have enough hands in my range that can continue on this board, and this just is not one of them, and that's cool. So Illyri actually, as you can see, these guys play deceptively. He checked back, they have well-balanced check back ranges. He checked back with a marginal queen, and obviously called turn bet. He opted not to bet the river, which is a little curious to me. Especially given his image is kind of aggressive. He potentially could have gotten paid off here, I'm not sure. But yeah, I probably should have check called the turn. Actually, I might even face a river bet in that case and lose more. But anyways, I'm going to wrap this up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, especially as I'm kind of just easing my way into making videos, I welcome any feedback of any kind, even critiques, and questions and comments as well. It's kind of part of the enjoyment of teaching is hearing how you guys feel about it, and whether it's good or bad. It's a little nicer when it's good feedback, but I'm open, and I'll continue to work on things and make the best videos I can. Thanks for watching. This is Phil Galfond for RunItOnce.com. I will see you guys soon. Take care.